Imagine this. What if everything we know just stopped? Not in some sci-fi movie future, but maybe, just maybe, sooner than we think.
Yeah, it sounds dramatic, right? Like a movie pitch.
Totally. But what if there are actual real threats out there that could, end our story or change it forever?
That's exactly what we're diving into today. It's a critical moment for humanity, actually.
How so?
Because our own advancements, the very tech we've built, combined with, the sheer power of nature, they present risks our ancestors never even conceived of.
You mean existential risks?
Precisely. Threats that could literally wipe out intelligent life from Earth or permanently stunt our potential. It's a whole new kind of vulnerability, really, because we now have the power to cause planet-level problems.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to take in. So we're going to try and unpack this for you. Think of this as your guide to the biggest threats facing us.
Right. And for this deep dive, we've looked at some fascinating material. We've got insights from NASA on planetary defense, stuff on the new space economy.
Elon Musk's whole Mars plan.
Yeah, his argument for that insurance policy. And also some really deep academic work that breaks down these risks piece by piece.
So our mission here isn't to freak you out.
Yeah.
Promise.
No, definitely not. It's about understanding what are the biggest threats, why are they different now, and, importantly, what are people thinking we can actually do about them?
Okay, let's jump right in with that insurance policy idea.
Yeah.
Elon Musk talks a lot about Mars, about needing a backup plan. Why is he so focused on making us a multi-planetary species?
Well, his argument is pretty straightforward, really. It's about fragility. Putting all of humanity's eggs in one basket, Earth, is just fundamentally risky.
Because things can go wrong here.
Exactly. We've got potential environmental disasters, climate change tipping points, and then there are the things we could cause. Major conflicts or maybe some new technology backfiring spectacularly.
Yeah.
So for Musk, Mars isn't just about adventure. It's presented as a basic precaution, a backup drive for humanity, if you like, to make sure that if the worst happens here,
the human story doesn't just end.
Precisely. It can continue somewhere else.
Okay, so that's the big, bold vision. But let's zoom back in a bit and define our terms. What exactly makes a risk existential? How is it different from, say, a terrible earthquake or even, the pandemic we all just went through?
That's a really key question. Nick Bostrom, who's a major thinker in this area, he defines it really clearly. An existential risk is one that would either completely annihilate Earth-originating intelligent life.
Wipe us out.
Right. Or permanently, drastically curtail our potential, like cripple us forever. The key word is permanently.
Ah, okay. So historical disasters, however awful, didn't stop humanity's overall progress.
Exactly. We recovered, our potential remained, but these risks, they threaten the entire future trajectory. And Bostrom points out something pretty sobering. Until maybe the mid-20th century, with things like nuclear weapons, we probably didn't have the power to cause our own extinction, barring like a massive asteroid hit or something incredibly rare like that.
Right. It's our own power that's created some of these new dangers.
In many cases, yes.
Okay. So Bostrom actually breaks these risks down into categories, doesn't he? I saw these terms. Bangs, crunches, shrieks, and whimpers. Kind of evocative names.
They are, yeah. They help you sort of grasp the different flavors of doom, if you will.
Let's start with bangs. This is abrupt.
Yeah, bangs are the quick ones. Sudden extinction events. They could be accidents, or they could be deliberate.
Examples.
Well, runaway global warming hitting some irreversible point could maybe fit, though the sources don't frame it quite as a sudden bang existential risk, usually. More focus is on things like engineered pandemics.
Like creating a supervirus.
Exactly. Imagine someone deliberately designing a virus that's incredibly contagious and incredibly deadly. There was actually a case where scientists accidentally created a mousepox virus in a lab that had 100% mortality.
Wow.
And the scary part, the details got published openly. It just shows how hard it is to control this kind of information in biotech.
That is chilling.
Yeah.
Okay, what else falls under bangs?
Then you've got nanotechnology risks. Think tiny, self-replicating robots,
Wow.
nanobots.
Wow.
If they went wrong, maybe consuming resources uncontrollably, the sort of gray goo scenario. Or if they were weaponized. The sources warn about a potential nano-arms race being even more unstable than the nuclear one.
Why more unstable?
Because you don't necessarily need huge, obvious factories like you do for nukes. It could be much harder to track and control.
Gotcha. Okay, any other bangs?
There are more speculative ones, like risks from really high-energy physics experiments. Theoretical worries about accidentally triggering some fundamental change in space-time or creating stable strange matter or tiny black holes that consume things.
Stuff scientists generally think is very unlikely, though.
Current theories suggest it's very unlikely, yes, but it's on the list. And finally, there's the really philosophical one, the simulation argument. If we're living in a computer simulation...
Someone could just turn it off.
Right. The ultimate bang.
Okay, from the plausible to the truly mind-bending, let's move to crunches. This sounds less like a sudden end and more like getting stuck.
That's a good way to put it. Crunches are scenarios where humanity might survive, but our progress towards a more advanced, maybe post-human future gets permanently blocked.
How could that happen?
One way is resource depletion. Imagine we use up all the easily accessible materials needed for our high-tech society. Then, say, a major catastrophe hits, destroys our infrastructure.
And we can't rebuild.
We might not have the necessary resources to climb back up the technological ladder. Ever. Another possibility is societal. Imagine a stable, powerful world government forms, but it's based on an ideology that actively opposes technological or social progress.
Like a fundamentalist regime, maybe?
Yeah.
Or an extreme environmental one?
Could be.
Yeah.
And if they had advanced surveillance or even mind control tech, they could potentially enforce that stagnation indefinitely. A permanent crunch on our potential.
Okay, so we survive, but the future is limited. What about Shrieks? That sounds unpleasant, like we reach an advanced state, but it's gone horribly wrong.
Exactly. Shrieks are futures where we achieve posthumanity, but it's twisted, undesirable. For example, maybe a single AI or even a digitally uploaded human mind becomes super powerful, but is totally self-serving or just plain weird.
And it shapes everything to its own liking.
Right, imposing its narrow goals on the entire future. Or imagine a superintelligence that's incredibly capable, but its core programming is flawed. It carries out its flawed goals perfectly, leading to a technically advanced but awful outcome.
A dystopia built by flawed AI.
Could be. Or even an intolerant world government, maybe based on some rigid ideology that achieves stability but crushes diversity and potential. The source also mentions an ethical angle. If we delay reaching a better future for so long that basically everyone alive now misses out, that could also be seen as a kind of shriek if we value present lives.
These really highlight how important our values are as we develop powerful tech. Okay, last one. Whimpers. It sounds sadder almost.
Yeah, whimpers are where post-human civilization happens, but the things we value now just fade away,
Right.
or are only realized in a tiny, diminished form.
How would that happen?
The main example given is an evolutionary whimper. Imagine future evolution, whether natural or directed, just doesn't favor the things we care about. Art, love, complex thought, joy, our hobbies, as the source puts it.
So we evolved into something less.
Maybe just different in ways we wouldn't value. Perhaps efficiency gets selected for above all else, unless there's some coordinated effort. Bostrom calls it a singleton, like a unified world power or AI actively working to preserve those valued things. They could just gradually disappear. The richness of human experience could just whimper out.
Wow. Losing the color and just being left with gray. Okay, that's a sobering tour of potential catastrophes. Let's shift gears a bit. We talked about space earlier. The course has also mentioned the growing strategic importance of space, right?
Yeah.
Especially with the U.S., Russia, and China all becoming more active up there.
Absolutely. There's a Council on Foreign Relations report mentioned that really emphasizes this. Space isn't just out there anymore. It's deeply connected to what happens down here. Peace and security on Earth depend increasingly on stability in space.
Because of satellites and things.
Satellites for communication, navigation, surveillance, yes. But also the potential for conflict in space or using space for attacks on Earth. And as more countries like Russia and China deploy more sophisticated space assets, the risks of accidents, misunderstandings, or even deliberate hostile acts just keep going up.
And the report highlighted vulnerabilities.
Yeah, it points out that existing U.S. space infrastructure satellites, ground stations, communication links is vulnerable to new counter-space weapons others are developing. And what's really concerning is the lack of direct, reliable communication channels.
Like a hotline.
Exactly. Apparently, there's no secure, real-time hotline between Washington and Beijing specifically for space incidents, just an unsecured email system, which seems inadequate given the stakes.
That sounds like a recipe for serious trouble if something goes wrong. Does the report suggest solutions?
It does. Top recommendations include establishing that secure Washington-Beijing space hotline urgently. Also, developing a proper global system for space traffic management, like air traffic control, but for orbit.
to avoid collisions.
Right, and strengthening international agreements on things like rescuing astronauts in distress. It also really pushes for more collaboration between governments, the private sector like SpaceX and academia. The core idea is treating space as a global commons.
Shared space, shared responsibility. Okay. Now, another threat, but one we're actively trying to prevent, is asteroid impacts. It's kind of amazing we can even think about deflecting asteroids now.
It really is incredible progress, and the good news, relatively speaking, is that we found most of the really huge ones, the potential civilization enders over a kilometer wide that might threaten us in the near future. None seem to be on a collision course right now.
But smaller ones are still a danger.
Oh, definitely. We're still finding smaller ones that could cause immense regional devastation. Even something 60, 80 meters hitting near a city could kill tens of thousands. A 700-meter one could cause millions of deaths. And comets are trickier. They can come out of the blue with less warning.
So even if not extinction level, still catastrophic.
Potentially, yes. Without preparation, a truly massive impact, like the Chicxulub one linked to the dinosaurs, could still be an existential threat.
So what are we doing? You mentioned NASA.
NASA has a dedicated office, the Planetary Defense Coordination Office, PDCO, and they work with international partners like the European Space Agency, ESA. There's a whole system now.
What does that involve?
Well, specialized telescopes scanning the sky for near-Earth objects, or NEOs. Missions that have flown past, orbited, even landed on asteroids and comets to study them. Systems that constantly track known objects and calculate impact risks.
And we've actually tested deflection, right? With DART.
Yes. The DART mission was a huge success. It deliberately crashed a spacecraft into a small asteroid moonlet and measurably changed its orbit. Proof of concept for the kinetic impactor technique.
You're just pushing it out of the way.
Essentially, yes. For bigger threats, or ones found with less warning time, the other main option considered is using a nuclear explosive device. Not necessarily to blow it up, but to use the blast's energy to give it a much stronger push. Though that obviously comes with its own set of complexities.
And warning time is key for all this.
Absolutely critical. It dictates whether we can mount a deflection mission at all, and also how much time we have for preparations on Earth evacuations, securing infrastructure, sheltering.
How much warning might we get?
It varies wildly. Could be zero, like the Chelyabinsk meteor in Russia in 2013,
Right.
or it could be decades, like for the asteroid Apophis, which we know will pass very close in 2029 but won't hit. Having powerful, cheaper rockets like SpaceX's Starship or Blue Origin's New Glenn could be a game changer here, too.
How so?
They could potentially launch larger deflection missions faster and more affordably if a threat is detected.
Okay, so asteroids are one major natural threat. Another one mentioned is supervolcanoes. These aren't just big volcanoes, are they?
No, they're a whole different scale of event. Often they don't even look like typical cone-shaped volcanoes. They can involve massive eruptions from huge underground magma chambers, causing the land above to collapse and form a giant depression called a caldera. Think Yellowstone or Toba in Indonesia.
And the eruption itself is devastating locally.
Utterly. Pyroclastic flows, super hot avalanches of gas and debris can obliterate everything for maybe 100 kilometers around. Massive ashfall can blanket thousands of kilometers, collapsing buildings, choking transport. You can also get lahars, which is like volcanic mud flows, and even tsunamis if the eruption is near or under the sea.
The bigger threat is global, right? The cooling effect.
That's the main long-term global concern, yes. Super eruptions blast enormous amounts of sulfur dioxide gas high into the stratosphere. This gas forms aerosols that reflect sunlight, leading to a significant drop in global temperatures.
Like a volcanic winter.
Exactly. The exact amount of cooling and how long it lasts is uncertain. But it could disrupt weather patterns globally, leading to widespread crop failures. The ash itself also causes huge problems for aviation, infrastructure, and health respiratory issues mainly.
So the immediate deaths might be localized, but the indirect effects could be worldwide.
Right. The potential for mass starvation due to agricultural collapse is probably the biggest long-term threat from a supereruption, potentially leading to millions, maybe even billions of deaths in the worst scenarios, though confidence in those numbers is low due to limited research. Thankfully, these events are very rare, maybe one every 15,000 years or so on average. But the potential impact is enormous.
We saw a glimpse of unusual volcanic effects with the Tonga eruption recently, too, didn't we? That was underwater.
Yes. Tonga was fascinating, though not a supereruption. Being underwater, it caused major tsunamis and blasted debris and gas high up. It damaged undersea communication cables, which was a big problem.
And it did something weird with water vapor.
It did. It injected an absolutely massive amount of water vapor directly into the stratosphere, way more than usual. And unlike sulfur dioxide, which cools, water vapor is a greenhouse gas. So Tonga might actually cause a slight temporary warming effect, which is unusual for a large eruption. It shows submarine eruptions can have unique impacts.
Okay, so we have all these potential threats, natural and man-made. Let's bring it back to human ingenuity and maybe solutions, or at least progress. SpaceX comes up a lot, obviously, with the Mars vision, but also just advancing space tech generally.
For sure. SpaceX is undeniably a major player. Their Starship program is hugely ambitious, aiming for a fully reusable rocket capable of taking large payloads and eventually people to the Moon, Mars, and potentially beyond. That reusable aspect is key to making space travel much cheaper and more accessible.
Even though that first big test flight didn't quite go to plan.
No, though, the rapid unscheduled disassembly, as they called it. But even that was a massive step, providing tons of data. They learn fast. And it's not just Starship.
Right, Starlink.
Starlink is deploying thousands of satellites for global internet. It has its challenges, like dealing with solar storms, but it's expanding rapidly. And their Crew Dragon spacecraft has been regularly taking NASA astronauts to the International Space Station.
Restoring U.S. human launch capability.
Exactly. The first commercial system certified by NASA for that. Plus, you have things like the planned Dear Moon mission, a private trip around the moon funded by a Japanese billionaire using Starship. It all signals a real shift in who's doing what in space.
And they are trying to address the concerns from astronomers about Starlink blocking the view.
They are making efforts, yes, trying to make the satellites darker, sharing orbital data more readily. It's an ongoing issue, but they seem to be engaging with it.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it's clear there's this huge, complex landscape of potential risks facing us. From our own tech running wild to cosmic collisions to the Earth itself erupting, we've covered a lot of those bangs and whimpers, base security, planetary defense, volcanoes.
And the efforts, like SpaceX's, to push outwards. The big picture here, really, is that understanding these risks, even the ones that seem unlikely or far off, is just incredibly important. It's not about fear-mongering, it's about being informed.
So we can make better decisions about research, funding, policy.
Exactly. These aren't just abstract thought experiments. They relate to real choices we need to make about our collective future, about ensuring the long-term survival and flourishing of humanity.
So as you've been listening along with us today, what really stood out to you? Which of these risks feels most pressing or maybe most neglected? Do you think we're putting our efforts in the right places?
Yeah, that makes you think, doesn't it? Which leads to maybe one final thought to leave you with. As we keep developing incredibly powerful technologies, and as we look towards venturing further into space, are we actually prepared? Prepared for the risks, but also for the opportunities.
Is the key to our long-term survival out there, on Mars or beyond, or is it mainly about tackling the challenges and the risks right here on Earth?
Big questions, and probably the answer is both.
Probably. Well, if this deep dive got you thinking about our future and the challenges ahead, definitely hit that subscribe button. We'll be bringing you more explorations of the big topics shaping our world.
And please leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Which risk worries you most? Got ideas for other topics we should tackle? Let us know.
Your input is always fantastic. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.